It is a Saturday Coffee Klatch with Heather Lofthouse and yours truly, Robert Reich. Heather, what's going on?
Not much. Let's talk about people. So, how about Kamala Harris, Tim Walz, Donald Trump, Elon Musk?
To take a random group of
Yeah.
people who are in the limelight, let us say. I was thinking before we get started, 3 weeks ago, I mean, I know it's hard to imagine 3 weeks ago, but 3 weeks ago, Joe Biden was still president. He is president
know.
today, but he was still going to be running 3 weeks ago.
I know.
Heather.
We were clutching 3 weeks ago.
And we were desperate. I mean, I was trying to be fairly positive, and you were trying to be positive, but
we were going through lists of, he won't, will he? And when would he, if he were going to step down? And who out there in the world?
and that's right. He wouldn't step down because the only person he could possibly step down to
Would be the phenomenal Kamala Harris.
Kamala Harris.
I know, but truly, we all said,
here's the thing: that 3 weeks. I mean, what's astounding to me is the 3 weeks can turn the world upside down. I mean, here we are. And the same thing was with Tim Walz. I mean, I remember last week we were kind of there's a variety of people and
probably Shapiro.
maybe Shapiro because
know.
it's Pennsylvania, and then suddenly Tim
No,
Walz
Kelly.
and
Right.
and Tim Walz. But when these things happen, the fact that Kamala Harris suddenly became the presidential candidate and Tim Walz suddenly became the vice presidential candidate, and it seems, in retrospect, so obvious.
I know.
It's,
it is.
I mean, really,
Some kind of bias for sure.
What do you mean bias?
Present tense. I'm sure there's a bias that describes that, where the things that are happening today seem obvious when they didn't before they happened.
What you mean? There's bias in terms of we think the future is foretold. The future tells
Yeah.
us in the background.
No, but it should have been obvious to us. It should have been so obvious.
Well, it feels like it
Yeah.
should have been obvious.
Yeah.
That's the and I can't believe. I mean, I remember many things I'm 100 years old, and many things
Not true.
have happened over the last since the post-war, in the post-war era, that have been bad, and changed everybody's feelings about everything, turned the world
Quickly.
upside down very, very quickly. But they were bad things, 9/11 and assassinations and so on. But can you name anything that is really good, like the naming of Kamala Harris and
Right.
Tim Walz?
You mean that has happened so quickly and got so much positive energy and such a
So
thrust
much
forward
positive energy,
so quickly?
so fast.
I can't. I don't have any examples
Can you
of that.
can you come up with anything? I mean, let
When
us
my
know.
child was born.
Well, I remember that.
No, it wasn't actually that quick that it was so
wasn't, no.
positive.
No, but it's interesting to me, this surge of positive energy,
Yeah.
both for Kamala Harris and for Tim Walz.
But I can't believe it was 3 weeks ago. It feels like 200 years ago, doesn't it?
It feels like a long
Yeah.
time ago.
And also everything changes online so quickly. All the accounts have changed and and then all the memes go crazy and everyone's tweeting.
all the news. I mean,
News.
it's you feel in this day and age, maybe it's more now than it was before, that when things happen, there's a time warp.
Yeah.
And you get into the time warp, and it feels like it's been months.
Do we sound like old fogies?
No, I'm an old fogey.
I feel like we're just.
You're a young
Look at
fogey.
how time is passing us by.
Yes,
It's
well,
faster
that's
than
what
it ever was.
Hello, that's where I am.
That's where I am too. But it is, and even the signs at all the events, it's like, oh, Harris Walls. I feel like, oh, I've seen that.
Harris
I've seen
Walz,
those,
of
yeah.
course. I mean, I couldn't even say it for 3 days.
I know. And it's also been so interesting to see Kamala at all the rallies, see Tim Walz. He is so interesting to watch because he's almost giddy behind her. I feel like he's kind of almost not fidgety in a negative way, but he's kind of electrified.
I could not believe how fast this past week he is named, and suddenly I don't know how other people felt. I was sort of in the I wanted Mark Kelly. I mean, Mark Kelly, the astronaut. And I thought, and then suddenly Tim Walz is named, and I could say, wait a minute, Tim Walz. Isn't he? He's the high school teacher, the coach.
You knew more than I did.
I mean, do you remember Friday Night Lights? Do you remember that series? And I could see, and he's small town and Midwestern, and I thought of Hubert Humphrey and all the Minnesota politicians I've known,
Yeah.
and Minnesota, the kindness
Yep.
and the cheerfulness, and oh, this is obvious. This is obvious.
Yeah.
And you have on the other side, you've got Trump and Vance and the darkness and the fear and the loss and the negativity and the ugh, who wants to be there? You got all of the lightness and brightness and positivity on the side of Kamala, and especially with Walz added to it.
I know. But then certain people came out, the New York Times editorial board, and said, too progressive.
It was those Washington Post editorial board.
Oh,
Yes,
Washington Post.
They said, what's this kind of establishment, Washington, New York?
Yeah.
Would have Shapiro would have been better because it's you needed Pennsylvania, or Walz is too progressive. Well, what does that mean in this day and age, to be too progressive? That you believe in things that for the American worker that the rest of the country and also believes? Paid leave? Is that too progressive, Washington Post? Or how about, the environmental policies that Minnesota has put in place?
And how about free lunch?
And
free school lunch and breakfast for all children, regardless of family income.
Well, Milton Friedman said there's no such thing as a free lunch.
Yeah, but there is in Minnesota.
There is in Minnesota. And but Minnesota does it in a way that is just, and Walz kind of is emblematic of that. It's just, this is what we do for each other.
Right.
We're all together in this. This is not a partisan fight.
Yeah. It's interesting to watch them because he's a little more informal than she is, right? But that's okay because they're complementary in that way.
Absolutely. Yeah. And Vance tries to go after his military record. Oh, you do. And it all sounds so negative.
Yep.
And he was in the National Guard, Walz for 24 years. And Vance is going after. It's the same tone. It's the Trump tone. It's the vicious tone, the nasty tone. And a lot of Americans now are saying, we don't need that.
Right.
That doesn't have to be American politics.
And even Kamala at her rallies, when they start to chant, people start to chant, lock him up. She doesn't engage with it. She says that's for the courts, right?
That's for the courts.
Yeah.
That's her as a prosecutor and somebody who is upholding the rule of law, and more credit to her.
And she's kind of above it all, but I feel like Walz is putting in some digs here and there, but there's comedy to it. It doesn't feel
But Walz is
biting.
famous weird. It's amazing to me also that one word, one adjective suddenly takes off because it was not delivered in a nasty way. When Walz said it, it was kind of puzzled. He was kind of, what are this?
Yeah.
What, Trump and Vance and the Republicans?
Right.
What is this?
Right. It was observational. It was almost like a Jerry Seinfeld episode.
Yeah.
Not quite, but it was like, it's weird. Isn't it weird?
Just weird.
Right. And then a lot of people have run with that and said, it's more than weird, and I'm weird, and I don't want you using that for...
Or it's less than weird, or
right.
it's... yes, but at least it initiates, it launches a conversation.
And it gave him a kind of digital life.
Oh, did it ever. Also, the Zoom, when the history of this 3 weeks is written, it will also be a history about social media. Social media played a huge part. One of the reasons we're in a time warp is because social media has made us feel as if, Kamala Harris has been the candidate forever and Walz has been the vice
old
presidential
news.
candidate.
I've known that guy for years. Yeah. Right. And the piglet, did you see the picture of him with the piglet? These things kind of live in your head. It's interesting to see what goes to the top with the algorithms and the people.
But also the Zoom meetings that are the major vehicles for raising money now.
Yeah.
Which is extraordinary. Who thought of Zoom as a as a campaign funder?
Yeah, well, interesting. You mean because you're getting all the people together and then they write the checks, but...
Yes, but you in the old days, you used to get people together in big rallies.
Yep.
You still do, I guess.
But also the social media ads are doing wonders as well.
They are.
Yeah.
And many of those social media ads are being put up by the content providers who are 14 and 15 and 16 and 17 years old, and they're putting them up free of charge. Talk about free advertising.
Yeah.
This
Micro-influencers?
Influencers.
Micro-influencers. And just people. Okay, we have to... I'm sorry to do this.
What?
Donald Trump. Can we just
do we have to talk about
we
Trump?
We really do. I want to talk about...
I was in such a good mood.
I know, but we have to. But we can try and end on a high.
Okay.
So he spoke on, when was it? Thursday.
That was
from Mar-a-Lago.
That was the most embarrassing news conference. I was embarrassed for Trump. Now, that's saying something.
It really is.
I mean, he said, I mean, the clips I've seen, he said that his rally on the Mall on January 6, 2021,
I'm sorry, his rally?
his rally was bigger in terms of the number of people that came to it on the Mall than Martin Luther King Jr.'s I Have a Dream
I mean,
rally.
it was a great speech. I mean, that guy is delusional and lying and
I think he's out of his mind. I
saying
really,
untruths.
I think that the interesting question, Joe Biden gets the press is all over him for being this short of dementia, and Donald Trump is really beyond dementia. I mean, he's really into total nutto. He's saying things that bear no relationship to reality, and not only is there no way of correcting him, but also, let's face it, nobody in their right mind, sane mind, would make those kinds of statements. Or that the number of people who went up and attacked the Capitol was very tiny,
But the rally was huge.
but the rally was huge, and bigger than Martin Luther King's rally. I mean,
Yeah.
it's funny, but it's not funny.
Oh, it's horrific.
This is a man who could still conceivably be president of the United States.
But is there such a I know, and we can talk about the polls, but is there such a thing as a narcissistic flair? Because I feel like it's particularly bad these days. And of course, he's doing it in Mar-a-Lago. This room is so huge. This is a huge room. Can you speak up? I mean, everything is like just.
Well, I think that he was, if he's not the center of attention, he gets very nervous. And this past 3 weeks has been all Kamala all the time, and then Walz, and Trump has been displaced, and you can see it in that news conference. First of all, why did he have a news conference? There's no reason to have a news conference except to get attention, and
nothing was novel.
Nothing was news.
Also, if he was announcing that they were debating, I mean, he could have done that on Truth Social.
Yeah.
I mean, really, nothing was newsworthy.
Nothing. It was only for his own ego, his narcissism, his flaming narcissism, and it was weird in the sense that Donald Trump is no longer attached to reality. I mean, it's
if he ever was.
Well, if he ever was is a good question, but it's worse than it ever was.
I know it. Do you remember after the debate with Joe Biden that didn't go well for Joe, and then Trump came out on Truth Social and said, well, I'm annoyed at the media. All they're doing is focusing on Joe Biden. I mean, wasn't there a phrase? What was it? Never interrupt your enemy when they're shooting themselves in the foot or whatever it was. I mean, he can't even, the media's going after his opponent. And he's like, but what about me?
What about me?
He can't stop it.
That's the phrase that ought to be over his head every time. But what about me? But what about me? That's all he's thought about for his entire lifetime. But now it is pathological.
And the lies just keep going and going and going. So
he did not want to have a debate. In fact, he didn't want to have remember the black journalists just last week or 2 weeks ago, whatever it was.
Who knows?
But he did not want to go onto that floor and be interviewed because he was afraid that they wanted fact-checking.
God forbid. But you know who he will let interview him on Monday night? Elon.
Could it be Elon Musk?
It could. Ugh.
I mean, the two, if you had to come up with the two biggest raving, narcissistic,
power hungry,
grandiose, nutso people, they would be Donald Trump and Elon Musk.
I saw in Substack you did a poll and Elon won.
Well, I did a poll. I kind of, who's the worst? Who is the second worst person in American public life? And I had people
good options.
Good options.
Yeah. And in other category, but Elon rose to the
Elon rose to the top, 57%. I gave Clarence Thomas, a good shot, and
Mitch McConnell isn't even on there anymore.
No, Mitch McConnell just kind of slipped off.
Where's Mitch?
But and Vance was on there.
Yeah.
And nobody came close to Elon Musk.
I know.
Now the question is, why is Elon Musk such a stark raving public enemy number one or two? And I think it's because the cumulative effect of being the richest person in the world and owning the biggest platform, X, and then misusing X, abusing it, putting misinformation on it, that tilts it, the whole thing toward Trump and against Kamala Harris, and posting fake stuff of Kamala Harris on it, and then around the world. I mean,
Right.
he's right now the United Kingdom is convulsed in riots, and those riots are based on misinformation, and that misinformation is coming from X.
Yep.
And Trump
and him
is
specifically. I mean, Musk is stoking a lot of stuff.
exactly he's stoking it, and he's encouraging it, and everybody suddenly says to themselves, not only in this country, Heather, but I think around the world, this man is unbelievably powerful. And there is no way of stopping him. I thought one way of stopping it would be advertisers, get off X. But now the advertisers have started to get off X, and he is suing them for boycotting X.
Which, I mean, you have to say it again. I mean, it's wild to think about.
Yeah.
It's like our colleague said this week that his wife, Jen, used to own a bakery. She said, I should have sued everyone who didn't buy my cookies.
I mean,
if this is what we're doing,
there
there
are a
were
lot of
so many
people.
people who wouldn't buy my cookies.
I could sue everybody who hasn't bought one of my books.
Oh, there are a lot of them, too.
Well, I do. I didn't know that there were that many, but I mean,
but it's bizarre.
think of
but
the
it is
audacity,
power. I know.
audacity, and if you actually mount a lawsuit, I mean, if you're the richest person in the world, you can mount lawsuits against everybody, and even Trump was doing that. But if you are a defendant in one of these lawsuits, that's very costly to many people. You can't afford to be a defendant, so that extends your power even further.
I also didn't realize early days how bad Musk was, right? It was like electric cars and, good intentions, question mark. But wow, it's been like a snowball watching him.
Yeah, I think he's gone
Eat up
off. He
power.
has gone off the deep end, like Donald Trump
Yeah.
and with Donald Trump. And you said they were going to be, he's going to be interviewing Trump on Monday
Because
on
of course
X.
he is.
On X.
We'll have to see what happens.
Well, also, the irony here is that Elon Musk was interviewed on X by Don Lemon. Do you remember that?
Yeah, vaguely.
And Don Lemon, because at Elon Musk's invitation, he wanted to
That's
make
right.
X a place where everybody gets interviewed who wants to be interviewed, who is important, like Elon Musk. But Elon Musk was so angry at Don Lemon for the questions that Don Lemon asked that he said, "You're fired, Don Lemon."
Yep.
And there's now litigation about that.
Right.
And I don't ever want you here again.
Yeah.
And I don't want to have anybody on this X who I can't control in terms of interviews.
Right.
So do you think that's going to be a cozy interview on Monday?
Of course it's going to be cozy. But then, he would argue, well, anyone can come on X and say what they want, but then we wonder what the algorithms are doing and all of it. And who's got the loudest voice? I mean, he does. He has so many followers, and he kind of,
He's got 390 million followers.
oh, you know your numbers.
390 million.
Yeah, that's a lot of power. Speaking of power, so Google is monopolistic. It was determined this
you're
week.
kidding.
I'm serious.
Did you see that?
Yeah.
Where did you find that out?
News. But interesting, right?
Well, it's interesting that they were found by a judge to be a monopoly. That is interesting because it really does signify that the whole facade of big tech, which is all around us here in the Bay Area, is actually this thin. Because they're all monopolists. I mean, Apple is now being sued as monopolist. Amazon is being sued as monopolist. The Biden administration is taking on these big tech monopolies. And
Biden-Harris.
And Biden-Harris. And
Yep.
guess what? Big tech doesn't like it.
No, I mean, you don't say.
And the Google lawsuit really is, when you think about it, it's obvious. Google is paying Apple and others who otherwise could be search engines, not to be search engines, but to use Google search. Now, that's what monopolist does. You create monopolies. You buy off your competitors. But if that's a monopoly, and it should be, and it is, then we're all paying too much for everything. Advertisers are paying way too much for Google advertising, and you are seeing the beginnings of the end of the dominance of these gigantic trillion-dollar valued firms.
But won't it be geologic time? I mean, speaking of things that happen overnight, this is not going to happen overnight.
No, it's going to happen. Well, it may not happen. I mean, if Trump becomes president again, he's going to shut down Lena Khan at the Federal Trade Commission and Jonathan Cantor at the Antitrust Division of the Justice Department, who have been the major kind of quarterbacks with regard to antitrust. Have done a wonderful job. I mean, antitrust was a dead letter, Heather.
I know.
You know, I remember Robert Bork, who was my professor at law school, who wrote a book called The Antitrust Paradox and convinced the Reagan administration that antitrust should be conveyed, it should consign to the dust heap of history. But it's now come back under Biden, Harris.
I know. Okay, what else? Anything else we should cover? Probably something. The economy?
Well,
God.
Well, I thought we were going to start out with the economy because the big news this week was that huge drop in the stock market. But remember, the richest 1% of Americans own 50% of all of the stocks owned by Americans. The richest 10% of Americans own 92% of all of the shares of stock owned by Americans.
So distorted.
So the stock market is not the U.S. economy. Donald Trump thinks the stock market is the U.S. economy. The U.S. economy is doing, I think, quite well. The one criticism I would have is not of Biden. It is of the Fed. And it's the Fed. What the Fed should have done is start to cut interest rates earlier than September. And now Powell is saying, the Fed chief is saying, well, I will probably cut interest rate in September. No, he should say right now, we are committed, assuming things don't get even worse, or he shouldn't use that word, we're committed to a 0.5 percentage point cut in interest rates in September, and that's the beginning, and that will revive.
But he would never. I mean, they don't show their cards, their hand.
Well,
right?
no, but he could phrase it. Do you remember Alan Greenspan?
Mm-hmm.
Alan Greenspan would get on the television or go through congressional hearings, and he'd be questioned about what the Fed is going to do, and he'd say, "Well, what we're going to do at the Fed is we're going to have a percentage point change, but that percentage point change will be a function of the difference between the policies that we used to have and the policy objectives that we might have if we actually did think about the interest rate cuts."
And I changed the channel at that point, unfortunately. Yeah, but it is so interesting. You've said this many times, the stock market is not the economy. But I mean, people are looking at their retirement accounts and they get worried, but Donald Trump loves to just make the two the same thing. I mean, I think he doesn't actually know that they're different.
He doesn't. Or even, it doesn't matter. With Trump, what he knows and what he says and what he hopes for, it's all one mush.
Yeah.
So he's attacking, not surprisingly, Biden and Harris on the economy. The economy, believe me, is doing well. Now, inflation is down nearly to the 2% target of the Fed. Mm-hmm. Job growth continues to do well. The last job numbers we had for July were a little bit lower than we had hoped for and expected. The rule of thumb is 200,000 a month. And if you have below 200,000 a month, the economy is not really reaching its potential.
Right.
And that's what the problem was.
Right. And but people are still suffering.
Of course, people are suffering, but a lot of what they're suffering from is high interest rates.
Yeah.
And a lot of what they're suffering from
greed.
And
Price gouging.
big corporations that are price gouging. Mm-hmm. Those are the things, and we've already talked about the antitrust response that the Biden administration is mounting is the best response to corporate monopolization, and that's what's keeping a lot of the prices up.
I know. Well, should we let people get to their weekends?
No, we have a lot to talk about.
Okay, from the top. Let's do it again.
Well, we hope you have a great weekend. And
anything notable that you're doing? Any I don't know, parties,
birthdays, this weekend?
anniversaries, anything?
No, but I'm doing some fundraisers.
Oh, good.
For Paris.
Oh, good for you.
Yes, I'm going to. And if you are anywhere near any of the places I'm going to be doing fundraising, yesterday there was. Did you know yesterday? Yesterday.
Uh-oh.
What
I
was-
bet I didn't know. Here
okay,
we go.
yesterday was the 50th anniversary of what? Okay, anybody?
The
50th
Rubik's
anniversary?
Cube being
The
invented.
Rubik's Cube was it? No, it was the 50th.
The Heimlich maneuver.
50 years ago yesterday, Richard Nixon resigned.
Oh, I'll drink to that.
So there is hope.
Wow.
There is hope.
Ooh, good end.
Well, it's a yes. I'm feeling very hopeful, and I'm feeling positive, and you are feeling,
Yeah.
huh?
Ugh,
It's,
it's hard.
it is hard.
It's hard. And we
After
want
all
to
of
be
this.
realists.
And we have to be realistic, and the polls are showing neck and neck, and
Yep.
it's and everybody's got to continue to work. Anyway, have a wonderful week, and we hope to see you next Saturday.